us with this very important topic.
Thanks, Christy. And hopefully everybody hears me okay. Um, I know from teaching online, I was actually an online learner back about 10 years ago. I took two classes online. The worst thing you can do is talk for 1 hour and drone on. So I'd like to, if you've got questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'll try to answer them as we go through and try to make this as conversational as I can. I do have a hard stop at 10 because I've got to teach class here. In fact, it's the same class I taught Jeff when I was at K-State. So except the enrollment's is lower. So Christy's going to run my slides. If you want to go to the next slide there, Christy. Or maybe I can. Nope, I guess I can't. Um, there we go. Just real quick. I mean, that's kind of Christy gave kind of a dry introduction. I'm a wildcat, a gopher, now a bison, I guess, up in North Dakota State. But students have always been a big part of what I do. And I've done a number of student tours overseas. The bar left-hand corner there had a group of students in Ireland. That's at a co-op board meeting. The students worked on a project for the co-op in 2015, 2016. And then we went over there during spring break, and the students actually presented their survey work to the board and the members at the AGM meeting. Bottom center is a group I've had a long-standing relationship with Zamorano University in Honduras. It's a big agricultural school, and just really great students. The bottom right-hand corner, I just finished up a doctoral student I worked with in Chiapas, Mexico, with a coffee cooperative for 4 years. And if you've been following the price of coffee and the price of chocolate, climate change has really been affecting coffee at the high altitudes. And so this board, we were trying to create an income insurance product through the World Bank. And so we had to do a bunch of work over the 4 years, collecting yield data, just like we'd write a crop insurance contract in the United States, but doing something on income. And the board would pay the premium on behalf of all their members to try to keep some level of income there. So that was a fun project. The upper right-hand corner is a group of students I took from Kansas State. We did that 20 years ago. In fact, last fall at a tailgate, the bunch of them got together and asked me to come down to K-State and talk about that. So that co-op we were at was having a 75th anniversary. It's a dairy cooperative, and so it was a great experience. In fact, one of the students on that trip, I just had supper with him last week. I hadn't seen him since the day the bus left K-State after we returned. And here it was 20 years later, he and I were in Fargo having supper together. So that was really cool. And another student on that trip, Troy Walker, works for a co-op in Kansas, and there's a number of others. That's kind of fun. And then maybe the top center thing is that's a group of students I had in South Africa. That's a fruit processing cooperative. We were going down a dirt road in South Africa for that. So I just thought it's kind of fun. I like pictures, and that's a bit about me. The next slide there. Just what am I doing now? That you may have to put that on the whole screen there, Christy. We're looking at your computer and people. There we go. I worked in the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center at K-State for a number of years. At Minnesota, I worked on agribusiness issues, especially in food, and had a number of doctoral students doing real well. Last fall, I started a job funded by Ag Country, the farm credit, which runs from Kansas to North Dakota, then east west, and they've got a number of students, including some of mine from K-State, that work for them, and they've got a number of retirements coming up, and they wanted to fund a position for someone to work with students who might want to work within the kind of a CFO farm credit type space. And so they recruited me for that job, and it's a great opportunity for me to work with that. And one of the things I'm looking at possibly doing is creating a digital badge in finance, equity, risk, regulation, strategy. And so that kind of links with the topic of today, talking about the board and its role in authorizing investments. And so we'll go to the next slide there. I've been a director, an observational director on 2 boards and a board advisor for more than 100 different co-ops. And I think this topic is becoming really, really big because it's harder and harder to find CFOs, but it's also this issue of stranded assets or economic obsolescence is really causing a big issue in strategy and risk. And we'll talk a bit about that today. So the next slide there, Christy. And what started this was several years ago, I was reading the Financial Times, which is Europe's equivalent of the Wall Street Journal, and they made just a headline. Shell Oil Company writes off a $464 million investment in Antwerp. I was like, what do you mean they wrote off a $464 million investment? And there's something they approved 2 years earlier. So um, within 2 years, this green energy terminal they were building was obsolete because of policy changes. And then I had a graduate student start adding, but I was just kind of curious. I thought to myself, all these climate change investments, this whole issue of ESG and stuff, just what was happening. A lot of this was done by oil exploration firms. But last fall, he was adding up, it's literally billions and billions of dollars of investments that have been approved by boards of directors of publicly traded companies, all with very smart people with MBAs from great schools and whatever. And somehow they screwed this up and they were writing off all this stuff. And so I thought, what's going on and how might this apply to co-ops? So the next slide there, Christy. Um, so, I just, for a class project last fall, I took all these different oil exploration companies, had the students go out and find the board bios. And like I said, they all just highly intelligent people. And I just asked the question, how did they get this wrong? I mean, what happened in the last 2 years that these investments, which look profitable, that passed hurdle rates inside the organization that justified investment, why were they writing this all off 2 years in the future? So next slide, Christy. So if we think about this, it's linked with the concept of value creation. And I won't go through that today, but I've got a presentation I do for co-op boards of just literally what is value creation. And part of that's a math equation, if you will. But part of it is just how to use assets to generate value and value that that affects members. And so if you think about these oil exploration firms, how did they consider these investments? Well, there were financial reasons. There were tax credits, right? We had some of those in the United States under former President Biden. Some were regulatory. And so the regulatory regime has not changed in the European Union to the extent that it has in the United States. And then we had shareholder pressure, investor proxies and things that you don't need to worry about in co-ops. But all of them were, the minute you put a couple of these folks on a board, there's pressure to try to do things. And then there was a fear of stranded assets. So if you look at the United States, for example, we've got almost 100 oil refineries. No one could get an oil refinery permitted in the future. And so we're not building any new of these things. And people are worried that maybe the ones we have will be stranded. If you think about the refineries owned by, in the cooperative system, we have the refinery at Laurel, Montana. And then we have one in McPherson, Kansas. And then we've got the one owned by a group of co-ops in Indiana, the Country Mark Oil Refinery. And so there are 3 co-op oil refineries in the co-op system. And so, in fact, there's some that are closed that were the co-ops are still paying off because they had environmental things, landlords. If you read the footnotes in their audit report, there you'll learn something about this. But and so then there's also this fear of high sunk costs. What happens if regulations such as a carbon tax are put in place? That maybe we've got investments that might become obsolete because we can't deal with some of the, no different than a coal burning utility owned by a group of a rural electric cooperative. So in the coal bank system, for example, a large lender of cooperatives, there's a number of these investments that you have to look at and say, at what point does the risk of these becoming obsolete? Because we've got people on the board that think we should be doing more things with wind and other things, all good causes, but they have dramatic implications for the profitability of an asset. So the next slide there, Christy. So if we think about the type of investments that a co-op board is called upon to consider. So one of these is reinvestment in assets. And I know we've got some general managers on the phone here today, and so there's good tax reasons to spend your depreciation, right? There's things in the Internal Revenue Service Code where it makes sense to spend your depreciation. We need to keep assets in good condition because the members are using those assets. And so a cotton gin or a feed mill or whatever it might be, we want to keep this in good condition. We've got to do things to make sure our employees are safe. And so we have to make investments in safety to abide by regulations. Again, a board has a duty to abide by the duty of loyalty. And so obedience to laws and regulations, there are things you've got to make investments in. And then we can do things maybe more efficiently. So sometimes a large shuttle loader might be more profitable than a small one. And so these are the type things I think that a board might consider. And then you've got newer greenfield assets, brand new assets that are investment the boards are sometimes asked to consider. And these are more infrequent type things. So the reinvestment are things you might do on an annual basis. These new greenfield assets are things you do infrequently, but they're kind of exciting for a board to consider. We've seen joint investments into corn ethanol, soy crushers, assets. We put assets in an LLC. We've got someone from Southwest Kansas in the call today, and Wind River is a example of this that you share with a group of partners. So ownership of a shuttle loader, agronomy shed, et cetera. So sometimes there's very good reasons why a co-op actually might create a wholly owned subsidiary to own something to prevent use the members' equity. At a larger scale, the National Grape Cooperative, for example, owns Welsh Foods. So maybe you've looked at the Concord grape juice or the Niagara grape juice, which is the yellow juice, and the other is the purple grape juice, if you will. That board of directors, the National Grape Cooperative, has put all of the assets of Welsh Foods, which is the branded food company, within a subsidiary that they wholly own as a National Grape Cooperative. And then finally, a third type investment might be the acquisition of an asset. So this could be something you're buying from a non-cooperative, or it might be something you buy from a different cooperative. So as I think about the three broad buckets of investments, these are things that a board might be called upon to approve. And so we'll go to the next slide there, Christy. So let's look at the first topic. And Christy mentioned that there's one board that's in this webinar today. And so that board from South Texas, if you think about the things you might reinvest in, these are things that you're familiar with. So these assets that you are familiar with are things like that many of you might have used, right? You're a member of the cooperative, you're also elected to the board, but as an agricultural producer, you might have used the asset in your geography. These were built by a prior board and management team to serve members. I've got 8 brothers. One happens to be president and CEO of a farm supply cooperative in Washington State. And so he frequently talks about this at the annual meeting. Look, these investments, these agronomy sheds and other things that he manages were authorized by a previous board of director. And so keep in mind, over decades of service, co-ops and boards have approved things that benefit this current generation of members, previous generations of members, and members in the future. So it's easy to visualize their use and how they contribute to this strategy of the co-op because we're very familiar with these. Payback and impacts on cash flow are very straightforward in most cases. As a director, as a farmer, using those assets, we understand those. And they don't impact our balance sheet very much because the board may borrow some money from CoBank and pay some of this from earnings, but they really don't change the equity creation or redemption process very much or patronage decisions that members will question because this is part of the board planning process. So there aren't dramatic changes from my observation on a balance sheet. And again, these align with the co-op's charter. So if you look at the first article, typically in the Articles of Corporation, it says, what shall we do? So for those of you from Texas, your first article might say, we are an agricultural cooperative based in Texas, and we are going to do things to help farmers who farm in Texas. And then the mission vision statements that we have align along past, current, and future members. So this is how I think about reinvestment in assets, and that's a very familiar decision for boards to make. A second thing would be the greenfield assets. So these are not things we have familiarity with. They occur much more infrequently, but they're really exciting and they're kind of cool to consider. So typically these are things that we look at handling beyond the farm gate, beyond the co-op gate, and in processing. But these are things that where a board may lack full understanding, which is why it's really important to work with a third party. We may not understand the technology. We don't understand the impact on cash flow, the patience of capital, the competitive environment, the policies that we're working off of, the partner we're working with, right? We may never have worked with them as a business partner. What's the impact on governance? Are we going to own 50%? Is it going to be 51%? Are we a minority investor? these are things where boards lack full understanding of what's going on. And so you don't want to hurry these type of decisions. Oftentimes we're partnering with another firm on that asset, and a board may not have experience working in partnerships. So in a co-op situation, we control everything because we're the co-op. So the members have 100% ownership of the asset. In this type of situation, we may be minority partners, we may be equal partners, or we may have a majority, 51% or more. And those are different situations and different governance structures. And so it's really important to understand the business strategy and governance for that investment. Do you want farmers on the board? Do you want managers on the board of that entity? Um, in a co-op, we have farmers on the board. Sometimes these greenfield assets, if it's an LLC, our partner doesn't have farmers to put on the board, so they're going to have members of management. The co-op might want to put farmers on the board and management, or management. There just may be a different type board, and that's a different expectation, different decision making in that boardroom. We may have sole ownership in a new asset, so it seems easy to understand the asset and its need, but we don't fully understand the technology, cash flow, competition, policy, maybe far unclear. So it'd be kind of cool, right? And so later this month in Visalia, California, I've got Paul Bush, the CEO of Calcott, talking to the farmers in California about some of the things that they've done and some of the things they might consider as you think about adding value to cotton. I think all of us want to do that, but these different technologies cost money, and the outcome there may not be people to pay for what we think is kind of cool to add value to. So the next slide there. So let me stop real quick. So I'm about halfway through my slides, and some went fast. Are there any questions about a director skill set? So when you think about the boards of directors, the people we elect to the board, when you think about these investments, are there any type skills that farmers ought to have to make sure we've got people who know how to evaluate these on your board? And I'll pause for a few moments while you can type in things in the chat room if you want, or you can ask questions. Well, we'll move on, Christy. If other questions come in,
I'll let you know.
we can take them.
I did have one question just while you were talking. You mentioned
Sure.
working with a third party, when making these new investments, kind of tying into this skill. So at what point should a board insist on third party analysis?
Yeah, so typically you're gonna work with someone who's got familiar with these technologies, right? So maybe you're partnering with Land O'Lakes and Winfield, and so they've got people in house, right, that help set up these LLCs to run agronomy and fertilizer and so forth. So within the co-op space, we may have people that can help you with them. We've got co-ops here in the Midwest that are looking at making investments or have made investments in soy crushing plants.
Mm-hmm.
And so there, someone's going to approach you with a business plan, but you're going to need to work with an attorney. You're going to need to work with your an accountant or somebody to actually better understand. And then the first place to start is obviously your management team, right? So you want to work with your existing management team to vet these things before they ever approach the board, and then make sure management's involved in the process. But for any significant investment, the board ought to think about working with a third party just to be able to tell your members, hey, we had this looked at by so and so, and the information we looked at in the boardroom didn't just come from management; it also came from an outside party. Just to give some level of comfort and closure, if you will, if I'm a director on a board. And typically, if we think about the duties of a director, these are good things to do. It's good to rely on other experts in the co-op system and outside the co-op system, Christy.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we're going to switch topics. So we've talked a bit about investments. Now we're in the next slide. Yeah, you're actually right, Cody. If you make a mistake, and failures and successes really impact the member's thought process. I remember back in the day when I was at Kansas State Farmland Industries, a large wholesaling cooperative owned by the Double Circle, owned by a lot of co-ops. When they went bankrupt in 2004, they had done a whole bunch of things in the 90s and in energy and meat. And so forth. And so the thought of them going bankrupt was just so far outside anybody's possible scope of what happened there. And that's a topic for another day. But even 20 years later, 22 years later after that bankruptcy, um, people still talk about it, and it's just what might have been, and all the investments they were doing at the time with fertilizer technologies that were not well known, but they were requiring hundreds of millions of dollars investments. A meat industry that really wasn't using members' beef and pork, but it was making money. And so, anyhow, that's a great comment. So, if we think about risk, and this is really a topic that I'm trying to do more work with in my present job, there's business, financial, and strategic risk. And I think it's important to go through these. So if I think about business risk and what that is, it's really an increase in business risk is related to operational risk and short-term profitability, surrounding assets, and these typically have a low probability of occurrence. So what might be example of business risk? Well, it might be reduction in production, right? We might have a drought, uh, um, and so the members bring in less supply that year, and so our asset isn't going to work as intensely as it did the year before because we just have a reduction in production among our members. We have low output prices or high input prices. So certainly, if you're a soybean, if you're a farm supply cooperative dealing in the soybean industry right now with the tariffs and no sales going to China, we're dealing with low output prices, and the same is true on corn. And then we have the high input prices, right? So I had a meeting last week I did in Billings, Montana for co-ops. And the big thing in Montana right now with co-ops, similar to those that are on the call today, is the countervailing duties on phosphates, and then the fact that the high tariffs with Morocco and Belarus and Russia, we're just dealing with a whole bunch of uncertainty in phosphates and what those prices might be. And if there was a solution to the countervailing issues, we've got co-ops who bought at a high price that might be forced to sell at a low price, and their balance sheet may not allow them to do that. And so there's just a lot of stress going on right now in that fertilizer space because of some global issues and in our domestic policy issues. There's things like fire, theft, weather on the property. These are things that we can handle through insurance, but they still cause problems if they happen, right? Um, Failure of equipment or technology. Sometimes we have things that break, and so they disrupt the process. We have disputes, right, in relationships that we might have with buyers, landlords, lenders, or suppliers. Um, and so those are all things that we think of as a business risk. We have non-compliance with contracts, regulation, or other laws. Maybe we're not in compliance because of lack of understanding about the regulation or the uncertainty about a regulation that's going in place. Sometimes we have underperforming employees or we have injuries to employees. So in these type of business risks, we've got clear and well-utilized methods to manage that business risk. We've got insurance providers. Marsh McClellan's a big insurance provider, and they happen to be based. Their office is based just below one floor below where I work here and where I live in Fargo, and I've had a number of meetings with them and others. We have contracts, right? We have different types of contract alternatives we can sign. We've got price and supply management things we can deal with. Pooling cooperatives oftentimes have marketing agreements with their members. So there's a number of things we can do to manage these risks. Probably all the board directors, maybe not 100%, but let's just say probably most of them, and hopefully 100% of the management team understand these issues and the risk mitigation tools to deal with these situations. We approve insurance typically through a board motion once a year. We've got contracts and other things that management often will discuss with a board. And so most often the management team has got materials in house to evaluate these investments and the ways we deal with them. And the board, certainly a board expects management to have these things in place. So at a big picture, again, just like we talked about with the first type of decisions, reauthorization of reinvestment assets, business risk is something that directors have a high degree of understanding around. And then we'll go to the next slide there, Christy. So let's turn our attention to financial risks. So if we think about an increase in financial risk, it's typically things like business risk, but now we're impacting the equity of the firm as opposed to the assets. So the business risk is really asset specific. I think if you look at those bullet points on the previous side, they are asset specific. I think a financial risk is something that impacts the equity of the firm. So if we think about the accounting identity, assets is equivalent to liabilities plus equity. Now we're talking about the equity portion that's used to finance those assets. So financial risk might include things like the increased use of short-term or long-term debt, increase in fixed or variable interest rates. Certainly, there's a lot of uncertainty right now around interest rates and the direction they're going. The increased use of capital lease commitments, reductions in working capital and liquidity caused by some of the issues we talked about in the business risk section. And then some of the assumptions we might make on our capital budgeting for our investments might change. And so these often might be related to things like that impact our weighted average cost of capital or hurdle rates, or maybe the income we've got coming off those investments. It's pretty clear now, especially if you look at some of the information coming out of CoBank and their knowledge exchange and office in Denver, we overbuilt probably the number of shuttle loaders that we needed in the grain corn space. And so the first shuttle loader might have been very profitable for 10 years. The last one that was built might be profitable for the first couple of years and then not profitable at the end, especially if you can't use that to load trains today for soybeans going to China. So sometimes the business plan looks great, and then we've got some of these unexpected things that happen, and now that business plan no longer looks good for this capital budgeting process. So because these risks impact equity, we need access to borrowed capital from our lenders, but we also need member capital, right? And that member capital is created through the retention of a patronage refund that's accrued by the co-op in any given year. So that's why the members are asked to oftentimes retain part of their patronage refund as equity, because we have to have a strong balance sheet to deal with these things. And here again is where asking outside independent third party to analyze these types of investments and having management look at those things is a really good practice, as we talked about. Many directors, I wouldn't say all directors, but I think many directors and most members of the management team understand the issues we're talking about and the common risk mitigation tools to have more equity in a balance sheet relative to a similar business that may not be organized as a cooperative. And so there's a lot of reasons to show, a lot of evidence that shows where a co-op board might have greater amounts of equity than a similar business that's organized as a non-cooperative. And that's something we see in general globally, that co-op boards tend to like to have more equity capital relative to less. So the next slide there, Christy. So let's look at the last risk here, and this is strategic risk. So this is long-term in nature, harder to assess. Our crystal balls are not very good on this, but they impact assets and equity. And so these are unfavorable changes in macroeconomic or external factors. Certainly foreign policy is a big issue today. And so we maybe have the wrong assets or internal capabilities to meet current or future needs. Being positioned poorly given the external industry factors and internal firm capabilities. Think about something like rice. So if you've been reading a lot of the national press, you've been reading a lot about the rice industry in Arkansas and Texas and Mississippi. And a lot of that rice was sold to the United States government for use in our U.S. Agency for International Development Programs. Because consumers wanted different types of rice that might come from Puerto Rico and California or imported for that matter. And so if I'm a rice cooperative and all of a sudden we've done away with foreign aid, I have no buyer for my rice, I've now got rice mills that are not positioned very well for the current environment. And so people say, well, why can't these farmers put up orchard crops, right? It's possible to produce nut crops, for example, in the geography we're talking about. We've got irrigation. We can put perennial crops or orchard crops in there. And for farmers, that's a big ask, right? When I've been an annual crop farmer, if you will, and now you're asking me, why don't you go to change industries? The rice co-op can't become a nut co-op overnight. I've got these investments that I need to use. So this is what I would call an example of strategic risk. The environment's changed. There may not be buyers for some of this rice, and we've got investments that we just can't easily change to get farmers to change. So these risks impact the future of the cooperative. Often leverage is used with the balance sheet equity, so it's both a leverage issue and an equity issue. And these types of things need lots of third-party advice, and directors and some members of management don't understand these risks. I'm working on a case study right now of the olive industry in California. As part of my Visalia program, once a year, the California co-op community asked me to take a co-op that went bankrupt in California and explain what happened. And I'm working with the Lindsay olive growers right now. So one time, the world's largest uh, uh, processor of olives happened to be Lindsay olive growers in California, and they went bankrupt in 1993. And so the issue became that if you look back in the 1980s, people started consuming olives on pizza. They weren't buying olives in a can and eating olives. They weren't buying olives in a glass jar. At the same time, people began to think that olives from Italy and Spain were better than U.S. olives. Um, and then the European Union had a very favorable export program for exporting olives. Um, and so this co-op, which had huge um, assets, a couple of things happened. So number one, if you think about olives, you can't just go pick an olive off a tree and eat it. It's too bitter. So we have to put olives in a brining solution. This brining solution is often done outside, and there's plastic ponds that the olives go into, and brine is used to make those olives less bitter. The farmers in California are producing large olives, and these olives were not the type of olives that would go on pizzas and sliced olives. So as olives started going into processed foods, people wanted medium-sized olives, and farmers were not willing to rip up their large olive orchards and produce medium olives. And so the manufacturers were importing the type of olives they needed to make pizza today and other things, and the members were still producing the wrong type of olives. And so ultimately, they just couldn't. There were no buyers anymore for the this type of olive, and this co-op had to go bankrupt, even though it was the largest co-op buyer processor in the world of olives. Um, they just had the wrong plant and the wrong type of olives to meet the changes in consumer tastes and preferences. So next slide there, Christy. So typically, again, going back to the reinvestment in assets, business risk are generally the issues a board management team considers. Um, greenfield assets are things that are more infrequent. Um, and so the types of things a board of asset management help consider these investments to better understand their risk. These are things that a board may not see every single year. It may be more infrequent, and so uh, the board has to rely on management and hopefully third party providers to help them better understand those risks. So that's going to turn to my last topic on the next slide there. And so one of the risks are, we've talked about this issue of economic or external obsolescence and stranded capital. So the example I use to my students, which I think most people understand, is think about a shopping mall. And think about a shopping mall that was built 30 or 40 years ago. On paper, those shopping malls have large market value of assets. And so a local government gets a lot of taxes off those assets. The reality is people don't shop at those type of shopping malls anymore. And so if that shopping mall was to sell, it might sell at 10 or 20 or 30% of its value. Downtown St. Paul, Minnesota, where I used to live down there and went to church down there, there's a whole bunch of buildings where people used to go to work, the old St. Paul Bank for Cooperatives, which is now called AgriBank. And other co-ops had headquarters down there. On paper, those headquarters, those skyscrapers have got tremendous value. The reality is nobody is renting space in those skyscrapers or wants to own them. And so the tax money coming off those now is much less than what it was decades ago. And so these malls, these skyscrapers have become obsolescence. And it's difficult to repurpose those for condominiums, which is probably the only thing you could do for those. The malls, people are trying to think about creating schools or something from. So it's very difficult to take something and make that a new asset. So economic obsolescence is a decline in the economic value of capital due to a decrease in demand. So skyscrapers, office space in downtown areas, especially post-pandemic, have much less demand. The same thing in malls. External obsolescence is unplanned economic obsolescence and defined as a decline in the economic value of capital because of a decrease in demand from a change in government policy. And that's really what I want to talk about here in the last part of my presentation. there's a whole bunch of changes going on right now in trade policy that impact agriculture. And so external obsolescence, the type of obsolescence we're talking about. And this capital can become stranded. And so uh, um, the asset valuation becomes risk because the capital might get stranded. And so if you've seen those maps, for example, there's a bunch of maps right now showing around the United States where we've got this what they call trapped energy. So we've got a whole bunch of wind energy that's gone up, and now that energy can't travel across some of the electric lines or natural gas or where we have lots of amounts of animal agriculture. We got methane digesters. We have a lot of energy coming, and so people are saying these pockets of trapped energy. Why don't we put up processing plants that might process agricultural commodities? And so it sounds like a good idea. Um, But the reality is, if a policy changes, it may make that energy unprofitable. And certainly, there's an announcement here recently of a large a grain processing plant going up in northwest Kansas. And the first thing I have some phone calls from people saying, are there actually a number of people in Colorado and Kansas that are going to consume the flour product, the wheat-based products coming from that plant? And I said, I would assume that the business plan has accounted for all that. But at first glance, that might not be the place where people might put something like that, because oftentimes we put processing plants near demand points. And so obsolescence is the issue, and you certainly don't want to have a stranded capital. At one time, we had a wheat gluten plant at Russell, Kansas, and when that changed, when the vital wheat gluten market changed, that plant became stranded, and we couldn't make profitable wheat gluten there anymore. And so that it all moved to the Manildra plant in Texas. The next slide there, Christy. So here's what we're thinking. We think about external obsolescence being the whole bucket of obsolescence. We've got locational obsolescence, like we talked about malls and skyscrapers. We've got economic obsolescence. The next slide. And so could your capital become stranded or obsolete due to government policy changes? So we talked about the rice example. We talked about the vital wheat gluten plant. We've talked about the possibility of utilities being on the wrong side of some of these issues. The things we're talking about are these biocircular bioeconomies, some of the things that came out of the Inflation Reduction Act, which have changed under President Trump. Tax bills certainly have lots of impact here. When I taught a freshman seminar class in the Farm Bill, I said, we talk about the Farm Bill being important. The Senate Tax Committee has actually got more impact on most farmers than a Farm Bill does, because of the issues on inheritance tax and other things that really impact a farmer's taxes have far bigger impact than a farm bill does. And so these changes now have the potential to rapidly strand capital as an unintended consequence. And so we better have some idea how to value these things and economic obsolescence. There's a lot of uncertainty and some caused by some of these. So that's my previous. That's a great comment, Cody. In the previous graphic I've tried to separate those from the government policy decisions from the demand things, which are more the locational things that might come into play there. But certainly demand for renewable fuels, that's a government policy change. So that's an example of both a locational thing from a corn ethanol plant where it's located and a government policy, whereas a mall might be an example of strictly locational obsolescence. If we think about these type of investments, typically a co-op is not financing these with 100% equity or with operational income. So oftentimes these type investments are being collateralized to long-term loans from your lender. And so sometimes farmers are even asked sometimes to make these investments on their own, and they're collateralizing land. Certainly in the case of the high fructose corn sweetener plants built in southwest Minnesota and the sugar beet factories, farmers were actually collateralizing their farms to borrow money to make these investments in those type of operations. The next slide there, Christy. We can go to the next slide, and we'll take any comments on that. So here's a list of situations. I'm not going to read these, but I'm going to pause here and just take a moment and I'll give you a few minutes to read about these and think about the types of things that I'm talking about. Certainly, if you look at this list, the second bullet point there in the Rio Grande Valley, you all know what the situation was down there with the sugarcane factory. Um, the sugar beet plant used to have a sugar beet industry in the Texas Panhandle, and that had to change because of the some government policy changes. Animal agriculture is, I think my understanding is we've seen turkey production move to Texas from Minnesota after the avian flu of 2015, and the desire by some of the turkey processors to be diversified now in terms of location. Um, my guess is you had some coal plants in Texas, so those are all things that might impact some of those investments. The next slide there, Christy.
Real quick, Mike, I have a question about this.
Sure.
So, with in such a, can you give us any direction in such a rapidly changing policy environment? You know, what's the practical way to approach that? I mean, like this is a very, sometimes it feels very chaotic, tariffs and different changes in administration, which mean different changes with the EPA. And, what's the best way to approach that, in your opinion?
Yeah. So,
I'm sorry, that's a
um,
tough question, but
no, I mean, so if I were to ask this question at the University of Minnesota, my students who come from urban environments will say, "Well, farmers do like they always do. They just go get a bailout from Congress." You know, um, so now I'm in North Dakota State, and students don't talk about bailouts. They just talk about, we've got to deal with this through advocacy. Um, I do think we do need to have a better understanding of advocacy and what we're looking for. We have to understand that um, this is not, I'm not being judgmental, but everyone knows that our democracy is not proportional in the way we think it is.
Mhm.
The House of Representatives, for example, by the virtue of the fact that every state gets at least one Congress um, for the House of Representatives, and others, it's not linked, right? It's not like we have one congressman for every 10 people.
Mhm.
The ratio in 1913 doesn't really apply today. So there's a lot of growing resentment about the fact of our U.S. federal model. We don't have true proportionality in the House of Representatives, and we certainly don't have in the Senate. And so, as we just think about a growing country and where people are choosing to live within the states and so forth, um, I given that situation, advocacy becomes even more important, right? And so,
Yes.
making people aware of um, what's going on in rural areas, and but at the end of the day, going to your question, if in fact it appears that things like the U.S. Agency for Interactive Development are going to be in place for a while, and I'm not picking on rice farmers, so please, if you're with farmers rice or rice land or producers rice, I am not. But if I'm a rice farmer in this situation, I've got to think about what is my next generation, what's my next move if I can't produce rice.
I see.
And clearly, if you look at botanists, we can do nut crops, right? We can do um, orchard crops. You've got access to water. So, at what point do I think about changing instead of being an annual crop producer, maybe moving to a perennial crop producer? Is that something I want to do, or do I put in another type of annual crop? I don't have those solutions,
Mhm.
but as a university, we've got to think about strategically what can we do to help um, farmers think about new crops if this, in fact, and again, I'm picking on rice, but the same thing could be true of sugar beets. Um, and so forth. We've got to think about what is the next move because there just isn't enough money, it seems like, in the government treasury and everything you're reading about going forward. So, advocacy is a big issue. We have to have investments in agricultural research, trying to help. What do we do in rural areas? and how do we help farmers consider new crops. And Certainly, if you listen to the big CPG companies, consumer packaged goods companies,
Mhm.
PepsiCo and others have said we want to make all of our plastics from plants. So the University of Minnesota, my former employer, a lot of work was being done to look at, we can make rubber, for example, from Russian dandelions.
Mhm.
So I mean, there are things that those type of crops with a deep root, a rubber root, um, those types of options are out there. And so we've got to look at doing, during World War II, we did those type things, right? I mean, we made
Mhm.
rubber from, we made tires from Russian dandelions. So there are new. We need to look at alternative uses, and probably the bigger thing is going to be more industrial uses for agricultural products. So plastics, certainly, if you look at corn, we've sort of, I don't want to say solved it, but we figured out how to make corn fiber less flammable, so we can get it into clothing. Um, there's just a lot of investments through checkoff programs and other things that farmers make investments in to understand this. So universities, public-private partnerships, and that type of things are important. The advocacy work is important. And then we just have to get farmers from a mindset saying, if this is the new reality, I've
Yeah,
got to think about changing my operation. And so, how do I do that? And that's a tough sell, right? I mean,
it is.
but so I don't have good answers there, but I do think that it starts with advocacy. It's going to start with public-private partnerships. Certainly, I think most people would nod their head and say industrial uses for agricultural products is really going to be the future. And you know, uh, even the animal agriculture space. There's I won't name it, but there's a university I lectured at on the East Coast. You can't buy meat on campus anymore. They've done it from they argue cultural practices because
Ooh.
certain ethnic and religious populations don't eat types of meat and stuff, and they just said, the only thing we're having on our campus is going to be ocean-based fish and plant-based protein substitutes. And let me tell you, there are more places like my former employer who are actively, there's a group of faculty and stuff who are saying that's what we want to be in. So um, certainly we have less people that want to be pony drivers or pony riders on feedlots. And we've got what we call a futuristic feedlot here in North Dakota that uses very little employees. Um, so I could see a scenario where a Costco or Walmart say we want single site production of cattle, and we don't want moving Kansas around, and stuff. So my point is, we're just going to have to think about things differently going forward, and that involves a mindset difference as well. Um, and that's where it's going to take people like me at the university. It's going to take people in government and our advocacy groups to really think more broadly about that and understand we can't just do this overnight. It's going to have to be a gradual process. That's the way that these things work. So
Okay.
I'm giving you a long-winded answer to your
No, that
short
was great.
question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
If you think about ag technology assets, what can be obsolete or stranded? Look, we're moving to a glyphosate-free world. I don't care what people say. People just don't want Roundup, and Bayer can't afford to pay out. They've already paid out what $40 billion, wherever the number is, and claims there's more to come. And this has become the hot non. This has become the asbestos, dream for I don't want to pick on attorneys, but for people for class action lawsuits and things. So we're moving to a glyphosate-free world. Um, and if you look at automation and stuff, there's a whole bunch of people that just don't want chemicals and pesticides used on food. And so we're going to have to reduce the use of chemicals and crop protectants in the future. And so certainly some of those factories could become obsolescence. What about blender pups, right? If we think about this whole E10, E15 debate, certainly if you think about going to renewable diesel, and so if you can't do this with trucks, how we can get large things done? Look about vertical silos, right? I grew up milking cows. Well, then we've got all these blue harvester silos sitting around farms. Nobody uses those today for anything. It's all gone to the horizontal bags, or in many cases, nobody's got cows in those farms. Sugar beet factories. I grew up with Lotus 1, 2, 3, and Quattro Pro and WordPerfect. Those are dead languages. Nobody knows even what I'm talking about today among my students. Think about the Pac-10, right? That we used to have in the NCAA tournament and stuff, we had the Pac-10. That's constructed the way it used to be. We talked about the rice farm program, and let's go to my last slide there. I don't want to go over on time because I know you got to. So what's the bottom line? Why is this useful information? I believe to a board and management team. We're going to see greater financial and strategic risks in the future. The changes to move to more industrialization of ag products, the change to trying to find moving farmers to different types of perennial crops. Certainly, if you look at a Blue Diamond or a co-op in California that deals with perennial crops from their members, those are much different investments than an annual crop farmer in Arkansas or Iowa or wherever it may be. Your current assets are not stranded yet. We don't know what the probability in the future, but there's a good chance some of them may be. And so they're not economically obsolete yet. At what point do you stop making investments in them? And if you think about federated co-ops, wholesaling co-ops, mutual insurance, I do work with mutual insurance firms like State Farm. They undertake investments, right? Because they want to have in their portfolio of things that I met last night here with two investors who've got $1 trillion in investments, and they work with mutual insurance companies and others. The investments that they want to make are not just financial assets anymore. They want some physical assets as part of their portfolio. So what do you do? And so you get a large number of strategic risks in that environment. So I've got 5 minutes left, Christy. That's not a lot of time for questions, but if there's any questions out there, I sure would like to take them from people, and I don't want to take away from the next speaker as well. So.
All right, any questions? All right.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. I enjoyed visiting with your group down in Corpus Christi, and John Park, my colleague and friend at Texas A&M, is certainly a great resource for you guys as well. So if you want to, if you got more questions or want to visit me, Christy's got my contact information. Or John Park, Dr. Park does down, who's the co-op professor at Texas A&M, and I'd be glad to follow up with you in any way, shape, or form. So appreciate the opportunity to visit with you all this morning, and it is getting warmer. The days are getting longer, so that's a good thing.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Mike. I really appreciate it.
All right. Take care, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you. Okay. Well, next up, we have Mindy Fryer, and she is on the line, and she has some slides to share with you. Mindy, I can also share them if it's easier for you.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's just keep with status quo.
Let me do the switch off here. So while I am doing that, Mindy, so you have 20 years, right? Experience with TDA?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, my name is Mindy Fryer. I'm with the Texas Department of Agriculture. I've been with TDA since 2005. Prior to that, I was at Southwest Texas University, and I was the office manager at the Freeman Ranch there. So I handled all of their accounting and office activities. But for TDA, I've been here since 2005. I started as an intern. I worked in the marketing department under the Go Texan program. I moved to the executive office under Todd Staples, and then shortly thereafter, I moved to the grants office, and I've been with the grants team ever since. So I want to say 16 years with the grants team. My husband was also a TDA employee. He worked out in the regulatory grain warehouse and pesticide inspections. So I'm kind of one of the few employees here that knows a little about a lot of things. I guess my dad would call it jack of all, master of none. But that is me.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us today, Mindy. I know it's probably a whirlwind there at TDA, as it always is. So thank you for taking the time to address the group. This is this is a very much anticipated program that our group is really looking forward to hearing all about. So if you will just kick it off for us, and we look forward to your updates.
Sure, very good. So, as I mentioned, one of the many hats that I wear here at TDA, I oversee technically 30 different great grant programs here at TDA, but the bulk of it is underneath this, what we call the Texas Agriculture Finance Authority. So TAFA has been around since 1987. I've been with the program since 2009. Basically, it was designed to provide financial assistance, whether that was in the form of loans, grants, loan guarantees, and I'll talk a little bit about all of that, to help expansion, development, diversification, just to help get alternative sources of funding out there outside of traditional lending. Next slide. And I do apologize. I have had this cough pretty much since December, and I think I'm on the downhill slide. So under TAFA, we operate through through the Texas Legislative Appropriations and Bill process. The authority granted to us comes under Chapter 58 and Chapter 54. And under those, TDA has the ability to create rules to further enhance or describe what we're doing related to those programs developed under the statute. We recently, in December, actually since September, we started going through a rule change process to talk about or to make updates based on some recent legislation that passed last summer. As most of you may be aware, there was the House Bill 43 that made significant changes to several of our programs. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And it also gave us the ability or appropriations of about $100 million to implement some of these new programs. So to do that, we had to go through a rule change process. We are now in the adoption phase where we're finally going to be able to launch some of these new programs that the board has worked so hard to develop. So with that, some of the current programs that have been on the books that are available now is our interest rate reduction program. And there's two programs to that. So the way that this program works is we work with a lender, one of your local ag lenders. We will work with any lender in the state to get them set up with the Texas Comptroller so that way they can receive funds deposited directly into their institution to loan that money to agriculture businesses, ag producers, ag co-ops, any agricultural entity in the state at a lower than market rate. So let's say, for example, that you needed to go to a bank and you got a loan at 7%. What happens here is the state of Texas will come in, loan that money to the bank at a lower rate, probably about a 1% rate, and then they would turn around and loan that to you guys at maybe a 4% rate or a 5% rate. So a little bit cheaper than what the normal market rate would be. The average time to get that loan processed is about 10 days here. There was some significant changes to one of the programs. It was initially called our Young Farmer Interest Rate Reduction Program. Yes, the interest rate is available for operating capital. It can even be utilized to refinance in certain situations as well. So we've got a great loan processor here that can answer any additional questions that you guys have about that. Where was it going with my thoughts? So there was a young farmer component. The House Bill 43 removed any age requirements and just calls it now a farmer interest rate reduction program. There's a difference in percentages on that, but I'm not going to go into all of those details because every program and every situation is a little bit different. So one may look more attractive to somebody than another program, but we'll work with you and your lender to find the best possible. I call these products, find the best possible solution for your situation. We have also our agricultural loan guarantee program. I'll try to slow down because I know I don't have as many slides as the last presenter. The way that program works is we kind of act as your credit enhancement or your co-signer. If you're going to secure a loan and you might just be a little bit on that cusp of being a little bit more risky as agriculture tends to be, a lender can reach out to us and we step up to be that co-signer. The benefit to you as a borrower on that program, as you pay your interest over a 10-year period, we will give you a rebate on that interest. And there's a calculation that goes to it, but let's say you end up, and I'm going to use an example of $1 million note. If you paid almost $20,000 in interest, we'll pay you up to $10,000 for that particular year's interest. So, I mean, there's definitely a benefit out there. This is one of the programs that we've had, I want to say since 2010. We've had a pretty outstanding number when interest rates were extremely high in that after that 2008 market increase, et cetera. We've seen a steady decline, but definitely know that this program is out here, whether that is for you guys as co-op managers, if you've got farmers and ranchers in your area, these programs are available for them. When I was in college, I interviewed for a marketing job, and they asked me if I knew what the number one marketing tool was. And I was like, I don't know, billboards. And they're like, word of mouth. So we like to share all of these programs, whether they're applicable to you or not, but the best way that anybody can potentially help us create awareness is word of mouth. All right, that's what I got on the current programs. Now, what everybody's been waiting for. New grant opportunities. House Bill 43 designated a specific statute that says that TDA may provide financial assistance for this pest, disease, and mitigation grant. We are working at posting a opportunity for Texas Animal Health Commission, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, or research to design and implement programs to do basically control agriculture related disease, pest, or depredating animals. This should be a quick help mitigate immediate threats. So when we're talking about the cotton jassad or the mealybug or the flower beetle out in El Paso, some of what we're trying to do is create the ability for these three entities to mobilize quickly and help with mitigating immediate threat. So we've kind of got some ideas of what this might look like, and we'll see how this turns out. This is going to be one of those ongoing, evolving, and learn as we go. Next slide. So this is going to be the first of potentially of 3 additional programs that are going to be under the Texas Agriculture Grant. Our first goal is to support what we're calling our AgLink continuity grants. This is to support those agriculture businesses that are kind of that first line as soon as it comes off the field. We're looking at cotton, we're looking at rice, what we are typically calling bulk raw commodity processing facilities. Those typical entities that did not or cannot or never have received any type of federal payment. You don't have the insurance coverage like the farmers do or on the consumer side, et cetera. So our goal is to support those type of entities in like let's say you're in a situation where your processing facility didn't receive its maximum ability of commodities to process, and therefore your revenue is down because of drought, any natural disaster. So your processing facilities aren't running at their prime capacity. So you're not receiving that revenue. Our goal is to help come in and provide some of those provide funding, grant funding for you to either enhance equipment, pay for personnel expenses, and things of that nature to help keep you operating. So that way, when we get out of this drought situation or whatever natural disaster, and all of a sudden production yields start to increase, you're not behind the 8 ball and forcing a closure. We want to keep this supply chain moving. I know I just said a lot of words, so I want to pause there and ask if anybody has any questions about that. So the next slide talks a little bit more about our kind of timeline. We're trying to get this posted by the middle of February. The statute itself indicated that grants may not exceed $500,000. This is a huge change for the agriculture industry. Our program in the past couldn't exceed $20,000. So we're about to be able to make a significant investment utilizing our grant program to continue making sure that we have operating services for those agricultural producers to keep their products moving along the way. I just have to highly note that it is going to be a very competitive process. I know $100 million sounds like a lot, but in the size the size of the state of Texas, it's just not going to go as far as we're as we would think it would. And then if someone is getting a grant from us, there will be a ongoing reporting requirement. Grants through TDA are reimbursement based. You don't have to complete the project wholly. We can work with grant recipients to do payment requests along the way to make sure cash flow is not an issue for everybody. I see there is a question, how much of the 100 million is earmarked for the Ag Link? As of right now, there is not a breakdown for how each program, what percentage. I think the board is going to take into consideration the number of applications that we get. This is kind of still in what we're going to call a pilot operation, trying to understand what the size and scope is, what this looks like for the future. We've had quite a few conversations that once this 100 million is deployed, what does it look like for the future? Do we need to try to create opportunities for additional revenue streams? Will the legislature appropriate more? The legislature would potentially appropriate more as long as we show that we've deployed all of the funds and showed some type of significant improvement in the agriculture industry. Now, that's a very hard thing to show in a 1 year time frame, but we're going to do the best that we can. So all that to say, I didn't really totally directly answer the question. There will be several grant opportunities posted, kind of overlapping each other, and we will see what the demand is for each of them. I'm looking at the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. They have very similar concepts. So I'm trying to understand how they break it down by program or commodity. So we're trying to definitely get a better idea of how to make this equitable. So Karen, I hope I answered your question.
I have a quick question. So
Sure.
when it says competitive evaluation selection process, so when the applications come out, will there be, are you going to give sort of like this is really what we're looking for? Is it going to,
Yes.
yeah, so that
Yeah.
it'll help people,
Mhm.
understand whether or not they even have a chance, I guess is what I'm saying.
Absolutely. And just what we will do is we will post what we call a request for grant application. That is our official solicitation document. It will have everything in there from telling you how it's going to be reviewed, the administrative review process, what the scoring criteria looks like, or the categories that will be how it will be scored. It'll give you all of the instructions for how to create an account in our online grant system, what all of the specific instructions are for each section. Our goal has always been in the grants, yes, it's a large process, but our goal is to make it as easy as possible to balance what federal requirements are, state requirements are for fiscal responsibility, as well as ensuring stakeholders can easily access what they need to. So that's my goal here at TDA. I never want anybody to be in a situation of being on the front page of a newspaper So we work with you guys to make sure that you know what is out there and full transparency.
Mhm. Great.
Any other questions about this Ag Link grant? Yes, and so the question is, can an operation pair the interest rate reduction and a grant? Yes, absolutely. So if the best way to think about this is a capital stack situation. If you're getting a loan to achieve a portion of something that you need in your operation, the grant, you apply for a grant to do another portion. So sometimes that is a good consideration for investment into this program, showing that you're fully utilizing all opportunities available. The board may take that into account. So what you can't do is receive a loan and a grant, and the grant pay off that loan. So kind of think of it as you have this massive project that you want to achieve, and each of these sources can help you pay for a portion of it. Any other questions on the ag link? Okay, next. So I know I talked about this umbrella, the Texas Agriculture Grants. The way, and I'm going to back up for a minute and talk about the Texas Administrative Code. And the statute. In the statute, there was a specific thing that says TDA and TAFA shall administer this Texas agriculture grant. The way that we have chosen to adopt rules, the board, is create general authority to have Texas agriculture grants and develop sub grants underneath that program. And that's when the Ag Link falls underneath this Texas agriculture grant. From here, the board is also looking at establishing additional grant programs and eligibility guidelines to support the production side of agriculture, and potentially trying to come up with solutions for the ag business side that doesn't fall in between this bulk commodity processing. So if you'll go to the next slide. And I'm like, so finishing through this pretty quick. So, so as I talk about the production side, one of the primary programs that we've had over the last 15 or so years is our Young Farmer Grant Program. The board, as well as some of the testimony given during all of the legislative hearings, really wanted to make sure that we did not forget about the production agriculture side, because without production agriculture, the rest of it doesn't exist. So the board is looking at trying to come up with revamping that young farmer program, we've removed all of the age barriers, and we're solely focusing on the fact of ag production, regardless of whether it's an individual, partnership, an LLC, but trying to figure out how to make sure that we are reaching, try to come up with the best words here, the best possible program to support those producers in now this expanded capacity. We've kind of got a program designed. It mirrors very similar to the way the Young Farmer program was operated. Our thought process is that if we can help the ag producers, then maybe we are indirectly then at this larger program going to be able to help ag businesses when we talk about aerial applicators, when we talk about veterinary services, you name it. If we are able to give a larger grant to someone, then maybe they are going and supporting some of their local service providers to potentially offset some of the issues that the service providers are seeing as a result of some of these natural disasters and people just not spending the money as they normally would. There's still quite a few things to think through to make sure that we're creating the best program possible. So with that, I'd love to get any feedback or questions that you guys have. Um, and then I can easily add in more time and talk about some of the other programs that we have here at TDA, because I know I went through that pretty quick.
That's okay. I had a quick question about, you mentioned February of 2026. Are you thinking mid-February, end of February? Do y'all have a ballpark? Or,
Yeah, so our immediate there's a lot out there saying February 15th. Well, that's like a Sunday. And then we're closed on the 16th. My direction is February 17th,
okay.
barring any issues with my online system. When I hang up with you guys, I've got to go back through. I have notes on the paper copy to sit through and make sure that every single cell works the way that it's
Mhm.
supposed to. So my next week is spent testing the system.
That sounds really fun, Mindy.
I over my tenure here, the languages that I've learned to speak, farmer, rancher, IT, HTML coding, finance, I've learned a lot. Um, the question that's come in is, will we have regional trainings and help submitting applications? So our goal is to we will be creating a what we're going to call a pre-award presentation. And we will offer opportunities for people to call in and listen to that presentation and ask questions, and we will record it for for those that don't, for those that miss it. I will also be working with some of the commodity associations and having one-on-one trainings with them as well. So that way, if you're a member of any of those, you can reach out to them and they will offer assistance as well. The other question, is there anything we can do ahead of time to help start the process? What can we gather to make it easier to get through the grant process? So majority of the additional things that you could probably start preparing is getting an understanding of your financial statements. One of the particular areas that the TAFA board will evaluate is kind of your past history, your net and or your income and expenses probably for I want to say 3 to 5 years. Um, so just having those financials at your fingertips or working with your CPA to get that um, information about your processing capacity. So maximum capacity versus operations for the last, I want to say 5 years. So let's say I'm going to use a cotton gin, for example. Let's say you have the ability to run 50,000 bales. Here's your capacity for the year. And I'm just pulling numbers out here. So I apologize if this is not relevant. And let's say in 2019, you only operated at a 20,000 bale capacity. So those are going to be some of the things that they want to look at and see, you know, understanding the input and your maximum capacity and what your output was to understand that revenue situation. Um, I want to say the rest of the application is just going to be information about your business. So those should be pretty easy, but the bulk that takes time to probably gather is financials.
So will there be a time that'll be open like February 17th to March 17th and your cutoff?
Yes. So with every grant application, there's at least a 4 to 6 week window. So yes, there will be a definite due date. And if the due date is missed, we don't accept late applications, but just know that it is on the board's mind to have an additional round once we get through this first round, because we know there's going to be lessons learned and people that we miss.
Mhm.
So definitely just know that we have that opportunity ahead of us still. The
Wonderful.
question is related to prepared financials and tax returns, or in-house. Um, I don't know off the top of my head. So it says that you can, yeah, in-house, so balance sheets or profit and loss statements or audited financial statements. So either one is acceptable. Christy, did I finish answering your question before I jump to the chat?
You did. No, that was
Okay.
perfect. I just wanted to know if there was going to be a window and what you thought it would
Yep.
be. So the 4 to 6 weeks is a good answer. My other question too, I don't know if you could ever possibly answer this, but in terms of having an online system, what is your anticipated demand? Like how many applications do y'all think you're going to receive?
I honestly don't know. I know that last summer, my team here of five, we administered the 1944 Water Treaty Grant, where we
Mhm.
did direct payments to folks along the Rio Grande.
Yes.
We had 1,800 applications. So we're here. We've done it. We've done high volume, and we're capable.
Hmm. Absolutely. I think we had another question come in.
Yep. So what is the turnaround time between application and acceptance, or then acceptance and funding? So I think it just depends on the number of applications. It may take us a little bit longer than what our normal process is. Um, Ultimately, what I can say is our goal is to deploy a award announcement by no later than July with a grant agreement in place by August, to meet the end of the state fiscal year processing. Realistically, I don't anticipate a first reimbursement probably going out. And if somebody submits one in August, I don't anticipate a first reimbursement if someone paid for something in August going out until probably September 5th.
Hmm.
If something happens faster, I'm going to be so excited. But that's my first realistic expectation, knowing how long things take and getting everything encumbered.
Did we have another question come in?
Oh, yep. All right. So you said registration online would be needed to apply. Can that be done ahead of time? Um, so I would say yes. I just don't have all of the instruction documents up there. If you find it in other grant applications that are posted, you're more than welcome to grab that. I do know that there's going to be a switch in how the registration is handled between now and the time that this is posted. Um, so I hesitate to say yes, go ahead and do it now. But registration, honestly, once you log into the system, we're sitting here waiting for it. It comes to me and two others on the staff, and we're processing them within minutes. But the maximum it probably would take to get notification you're registered for the system is 24 hours. Um, the reason I say that to wait, this system houses all of our grants here for regular agriculture grants. It also handles our community development, which is for cities and counties. So some of the fields that are required for registration are not applicable to agriculture grants. And so without that additional guidance on fill this in this way, it's sometimes hard to register.
So in terms of getting notified of when it's launched, I signed up online
Yep.
for notifications for this. Is that the best way to do it?
That is absolutely the best way. So we will send out an email notification to everybody that signed up to that. I know that, I think even with Texas Ag Co-op Council, you guys send out notifications to members.
Hmm.
The Plains cotton growers, the rice grower groups, everybody is anticipating it. You will
Yes.
see some, if you're on social, we'll see a lot of social media about it. There will be press releases, and I'm sure that KX or any of the news stations will pick it up. I know that our communications team is ready to go to be able to announce it so no one misses out on it.
So do you see in the evaluation process, people who apply earlier will get favor over people who apply later or no?
Not necessarily. It's sometimes thought that way because let's say you're first in the list
Hmm.
and let's say you're number one and the reviewer gets to number 100 and they're tired of reading. But the way that sometimes every reviewer is different. Some people start at number 50.
Ah,
Some people go through them in order, and then go back and they get to number 50 and they're like, oh, I missed this in number one. And they go back and do the whole thing over again. So it just really depends on the reviewer. Um, I'm going to pull up I had one of my team members send me some tips. Let me pull that up. Um,
okay.
just be honest in your grant application. You don't need to use AI to write it. We've seen that before. If you use ChatGPT to help you, that's great. Just make sure that if it gives you brackets to say insert your information, you've gone back and done that. Um, if somebody is reaching out to you and saying, hey, you pay me this money and I'll write it for you, you don't need that. Our goal is I mean, you guys know your business the best. Our goal was to be here and make this as easy as possible. Yes, I know springtime is a very busy time with planting and so forth. So we're trying to balance that as well. But our goal is to make it as easy as possible. Some other tips when you're in the system, hit save as often as you can. Um, with anything, we've tried to make sure that the timeout process is a longer one. We've had instances where the system shuts down after 5 minutes, and that's just a glitch in the system that we're working through. So we always encourage everybody to hit save as often as possible. Um, if anybody ever calls you and says, hey, pay me $3,000 to get your grant agreement, that's not real either. We will never ask for money. The Texas Department of Agriculture will never ask you to pay anything to receive a grant. Um, go through. And then, yeah, I mean, even if you don't submit it early, start the process early. Save it, walk away, and come back. If you have questions, call us or email us. We're here for you. Um, try to be organized and logical in your thoughts. Um, make sure that you're reading everything carefully. Include all of the relevant information. If it's not relevant, if it's not applicable to you, because something that's applicable for cotton is not applicable for rice or grain, put NA. Don't leave anything blank. Um, if for some reason you run into any technical issues, reach out to us because that means I did something wrong on this HTML backside and I'll fix it. I've been working on developing this since September. Um, double check that everything is attached. We have definitely, and you'll see some of this if you start participating in some of our pre-award webinars. We have it where you can attach things and hit save. Hit save, and I can never say that enough. Hit save. Um, when it comes to budget, just be realistic. Um, have a good understanding of what it is that you're asking for. Because whatever you're asking for, we're double checking that down the road. So, some examples. We had somebody in one of our programs, they asked us to pay for, they were a mushroom producer. They asked us to pay for this equipment to handle some of their processing. Well, they submitted payment requests and just asked us to pay for the mushroom substrate. So I had to deny that because they were approved for the equipment. So keep that in mind. Think long term. What is it in the long term that you're asking for? You are funded based on that. So then therefore your reimbursement needs to be based on that as well. So I can pause there now if there's any questions. Um, the system will help with math, so that will be a great asset. we used to receive paper applications and things weren't adding up correctly. So it made it a lot harder. Someone wanted $100,000 award, but their budget totals only ended up being 50,000. So this online system helps ensure that everything adds up and you get what you are requesting. Also the benefit to this online system is we actually receive the application. It's not lost in the mail. It's not stuck in spam filters via if it gets sent via email. It's not stuck in someone's inbox and them saying, "Oh, I didn't get it." There's a legitimate tracking process behind it. So those are some of my key tips there.
Fantastic, Mindy. Well, last chance. Any questions? You got someone, a 20-year veteran here, so let her answer any of your questions now. And if not, we do have our next presenter on the line.
Hey, Christy, I do have a question for Mindy, and I'm sorry I joined late, so she may have already answered this.
Oh, happy to.
So once a application is completed and submitted, what is the approximate turnaround time before the applicant knows if they were accepted or rejected?
Sure. So, so yes, that question was asked, but I can never get tired of answering it enough. Because this is the first time that we're going through this type of programming, I don't know how long it's going to take the reviewers to evaluate them. I also don't know our anticipated scope of size, how many applications we're actually going to receive. But so our best scenario is award notices around July with a grant agreement in place by August.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure thing.
Did we get another one in chat?
Just a thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Hey, Mindy, I do have one other question. So
Sure.
Is it a situation where TDA will collect all of the applications, review all of them, and then make the awards or acceptance or whatever verb is right, all
Correct.
at one time, or is it
All at one time.
piecemeal? Okay, that's
Yeah.
the thing I was wondering about.
Yeah, so with other programs like our organic cost share, our the one we did the 1944 water, no, that one doesn't count. Our Star Fund, those can be done piecemeal. Those are kind of a first come, first served basis.
Okay.
First come, first served bases are hard when we have a larger audience to serve. You don't want to leave anybody out. The 1944 water treaty, we did, everybody had to, because that one was based on a calculation, the way that it was divided across acreage. It had to be all at one time. So
Thank you for your answer.
sure thing.
Okay. Well, Mindy, we can't thank you enough for joining us here today. I know you are in the thick of things. So thank you for taking the time to share this information with our folks. This was, a very anticipated topic. So, and we will stay in touch with you. We'll stay updated. And of course, if there's anything TACC can do for you, please let us know.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for the invitation, and call if you need me.
All right. Thanks, Mindy.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Well, we have our last speaker for this morning ready to go, and he needs no introduction. Gary McLaren, our favorite co-op attorney, has joined us this morning to give us some legal updates. So Gary, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Christy. So remember, as to me, I don't know about the other folks that presented, but questions are what we're all about today. And in particular on these DDPs, questions are the best way to get through subjects, because it's likely if you have a question as a director, probably one, if not many, will have that same question. And I kind of thrive on those questions. That being said, interrupt me at any point in time. I've got some things, some prepared things, but I actually received a question to cover today. And so I want to give that preference and I want to start with that. I suspect it's something that all of you run into from time to time, and that is in our board meetings when to utilize an executive session and what are the minutes that go with the executive session. So let's kind of start from the top. Probably a lot of you have perhaps an executive session each and every time you have a board meeting. That is okay. There's no specific legal law, rule, or requirement that says you have to have an executive session or when you have to have it or necessarily what the rules are, although there's one or two things that you need to follow. A lot of those co-ops I'm familiar with that have an executive session each time they have a board meeting probably do it or have told me that they do it just so that the board has an opportunity at the end of the regular board meeting to convene all by themselves, if you will, if that's what they desire. The executive session participants are determined by the board. In other words, they can exclude the manager and staff and any and everyone should they so choose, so that it's only the board making or having discussions in executive session. A lot of times that's done to sort of monitor what's going on, perhaps with the manager or perhaps with projects, and they just don't want to have those discussions in the regular session. But whether or not you do it every board meeting or you just do it one time a year, you need to do it one time a year at least. And let me tell you why. It used to be that we set our manager's salary and other benefits, that we set those in the regular board meeting, and that salary information, salary, bail bonus, whatever the compensation package was, that made its way to the regular meeting minutes, the regular board minutes. You all have probably heard me talk about this in the past, but that is now no longer the law. That is no longer the law because the manager, like all of the other employees of the cooperative, does have an expectation of privacy as to his or her salary in compensation package. So it is no longer a situation where we put that information in the board minutes, which this is a good time to remind you. Those board minutes are reviewable by any member of the cooperative. And so when they come in and take a look at minutes, we don't have a specific method or legal way to necessarily keep them from talking about what they read in the minutes. And so under a worst case scenario, you could have a member to walk in, see the manager's salary, if you do it like we used to do it, see the manager's salary within the minutes, and nothing would necessarily preclude them, unless they were a director, nothing would necessarily preclude them from going out and talking about the manager's salary in public. We don't want that. That's not good for the co-op. It's certainly not good for the manager. We want to give the manager the same expectations as all the other employees have. And so one time a year, you need to go into executive session if for the sole purpose of evaluating the manager and making adjustments as to their compensation package. I have this question a lot, and it is a very good question, and it is usually posed by directors that have previous experience, say on the school board, as a county commissioner, or in some other governmental capacity. And it is this question. Okay, we go in and we decide what the manager's compensation is going to be, and any other comments we care to make about the evaluation process. But then, Gary, don't we have to come out of executive session and make that, have that vote in regular session? The answer is no. You do not have to come out of executive session in our board meetings. And why? We are not covered by the Open Records, Open Meetings Act. So if you're a good school board member and you're accustomed to going in executive session, but taking no action in executive session and coming out, as we say, into the regular board meeting to take action, that's not us. We, the co-op, can take action in executive session. Now, you need to be careful about what actions you take in executive session, because if you were to be a rogue co-op and say, well, that's fine, we'll just have all of our deliberation and all of our decision making in executive session and keep secret from the entire co-op what we're doing. That's not going to work well for you. That is not the legal intent of executive session. And there may be questions about this. Even though we're not guided by open records and open meetings, we still need to utilize those same principles as to what it is we talk about in executive session. And the big three, if you're a school board member, you can name them off the top of your head, would be any sort of personnel matter. We have not necessarily a compensation matter, but something for whatever reason that needs to be discussed by the board that's personnel related. Those items need to be done in executive session once again, because of our need to keep that information confidential and private. Now, let me put an asterisk right there. Be careful, because you've also heard me talk about for years, don't become the micromanager. Don't become the board that sets every individual's salary and evaluates all of the employees, and you're going to do all of that in executive session. That's not what I'm talking about. Instead, what I might be talking about is if we have some particular health situation or circumstance that is serious enough that the manager believes that it warrants at least the knowledge, making the board aware of the situation, but not necessarily asking for a decision by the board. And so there are those instances. So that's the first big category of the big three, personnel issues. Second big category is some type of circumstance where the subject needs to remain confidential until a deal is done. And of course, the perfect example is we're contemplating buying a piece of real property. We're still in the negotiation stage on what we're going to offer. We don't want those details to make the regular board minutes, because perhaps a member comes in and gets that information and, if you will, ruins the deal for us or causes the property to have a higher sales price than it otherwise would have if we had been able to keep that information secret. So real estate deals, trade secrets, the pricing decisions that we're going to discuss as a board, any matter that if the information or data got out could be detrimental to the co-op in what it's doing, in its pricing, in buying property, in whatever that may be. So that's the second category of items we would typically reserve for executive session. And the third, everybody knows, and that is litigation, the threat of litigation, or some type of other legal matter. And I can't stress enough, I cannot say it enough times, that if you're going to have discussions about a lawsuit or somebody that's threatening to sue us or a legal matter, that needs to be an executive session every time. And here's why. It's not as though we may not ultimately tell the membership. This is not a transparency issue. You will find no person more transparent than me with regard to the members. But there are certain things that the members don't need to know until they need to know it. And if we were to reveal those facts too quickly, then that could be detrimental in terms of the litigation. And so if you're going to consult with me or any other lawyer about a legal issue as a board, or receive a report or just have a good old fashioned roundtable discussion, legal in nature, that needs to be an executive session. And that way we can keep that privileged. And what do I mean by privileged? All of you on this call know that there's something called the attorney-client privilege. And if you talk to me about an issue, I cannot go talk about that issue in public, which is a very important thing to have, because if I was required somehow to go talk about it in public, or if we just revealed it in our board minutes, then our strategy or what it is we're going to do or how we're going to handle it or what a document may say, even including a sales agreement or a lease or something along those lines, those details would get out by and through the regular board minutes. So that's kind of the big categories that we typically reserve for executive session. I so appreciate the person that sent me the question, because I see this all the time and I hear this all the time, and it's a wide range from, Gary, we have an executive session, pardon me, every time that we have a board meeting, to, Gary, we don't ever have an executive session. Well, at least you should have, pardon me 1 minute, at least, excuse me, at least you should have one a year in which you're taking care of the compensation package of the manager. Okay, that's only half the question. The other half of the question is executive session minutes. What are the rules for executive session minutes? So once again, remember, we are a private company as a co-op. We're a nonprofit, but we're still private. And so we don't have those rules placed on us as to what executive session minutes have to say. Now, there is one thing that you do have to do. If you make a decision in executive session, that is, you don't come out into the regular session, you make some decision in executive session with regard to compensation, that needs to make it to the minutes. And so Tom is our manager, and we evaluate Tom for his annual review as our manager, and we give Tom a raise, and we give him a raise to X amount of dollars. That does need to make its way into the executive session minutes. If we make a decision on real property, a firm decision, and not just, well, this might be our asking price, or this might be a price that we'd be willing to buy it for, not just a generalized discussion, but a true decision, or we accept a real estate contract, that needs to make its way to the minutes. Just the very basics, and you might even include a copy of the agreement itself into those executive session minutes. But those items would come in there. Now, here's the one you need to listen to the most, though. With regard to trade secrets, remember that's our second category, such as this is going to be our pricing, or this is what we're going to set Jenny rates for, or a whole host of things that would fall under trade secrets. We do not have to put that in the executive session minutes. That can just become an operating policy. The same goes for discussions with the attorney. Normally, if you're going to have discussions with an attorney where a decision is made in executive session, the lawyer more likely than not will provide you with the minutes. And those minutes are going to be very brief and very concise and tailored such that if those minutes were subpoenaed, we would have the maximum protection guaranteed to us to keep them privileged. So you probably, if you're the board secretary, you probably don't have to worry a lot if it's an executive session with an attorney, because more times than not, the attorney is going to furnish you minutes. There may be no minutes furnished under that circumstance, because if it's just a generalized discussion, we're not making a firm decision, then that's going to just go down as discussion with attorney about blank, the most basic, bland, non-informative minutes that you could have. Now, here is this wasn't asked in the question, but it bears discussion. Some of you have a staff member that sits in the board meetings and makes and writes the minutes. If that is your manager doing that, and obviously you invited your manager in to make those minutes in lieu of the board secretary making those minutes, you're probably okay. I don't have an issue with the manager taking down the executive session minutes. However, if you are inviting just any other employee, secretary, bookkeeper, whomever, to come in and take executive session minutes, I can't recommend that. And the reason I can't recommend that is I'm not 100% certain that that is an allowable individual to take the minutes and keep the minutes confidential. So there's a tip for you. What some do, some board secretaries say to me, well, here, I'll take the minutes down. I won't have the bookkeeper or the manager to assist in that regard, but you can't read my writing, so I'm going to give it to the bookkeeper to allow them to type it up in order to put it in the executive minutes envelope. You've destroyed the whole value of the deal. Make it as legible as you can. I'm not saying that executive session minutes need to be typed and perfect and pretty. All I'm saying is they do need to be legible, and get somebody, even another member of the board, perhaps, to write them out, put them in an envelope, seal that envelope, tape that envelope, because they're not supposed to be reviewable other than really by really three ways. One, they are reviewable at a later point in time by the entire board, so that there's some method of control as to later going back and reviewing these highly confidential minutes. Two, they are reviewable by a subpoena. If we obtain a subpoena for our executive minutes, contact your attorney immediately. And here's why. We may have put some things in those executive minutes that are privileged, that if we make a complaint, a timely complaint, to a court having jurisdiction over it, then we may be able to not produce those things, because once again, they may be privileged under the attorney-client privilege or some other privilege, and we don't necessarily just hand those over just because we receive a subpoena. We're going to police those and fight like crazy to not turn them over, unless it's something that we don't mind turning over. But we would never want to turn something over that had the attorney-client privilege. So that is about as fast as I can cover the executive session minutes, and who ideally you should be in there. I tried to make myself some notes so that I wouldn't skip anything, and I think I've pretty well covered all of my notes. So I'll stop there before I move on. Any question, and there are no bad questions, especially in this regard, because this is a subject that seems sort of easy and seems sort of common, And yet I probably have as many questions about this as anything when I attend your board meetings as to what to do. So I'm going to stop there and listen for questions, Christy.
Yep, I got one. What should be done with executive session minutes?
Oh, great question. So those minutes at the end of the board meeting should be placed in some sort of envelope. I always say a manila envelope, but I guess it doesn't have to be manila. In an envelope and sealed. My suggestion is the secretary of the board write his or her signature across the back of the tape on the envelope. They need to be labeled on the front, executive session minutes of the board meeting of February 2026. And then they need to be placed in the books and records of the co-op. But everybody needs to understand those are not reviewable by just anybody that has a key to the filing drawer. They are not to be opened. They are not to be violated or looked at or in any way, opened unless, once again, by the entire board. So if at a later point in time, and let me give you the perfect example, something comes along, let's make it easy. And we can't remember exactly what our deal was for the manager's compensation package that we made last year. Was it 100,000 or was it 100? I can't remember exactly what it was. Then under a circumstance like that, that would be an appropriate time to go back and pull those executive session minutes opened in front of the entire board. We go back, we review, we see what's happening. Second deal would be perhaps we made a decision in executive session about the purchase of real property. And let's say that had 10 different planks of the deal. We're a month or two down the road. We can't exactly remember. We want to go back and read those elements of the deal. That's okay. Third way they would be open would be, if we got a subpoena, my suggestion would be we as a board open the minutes that have been subpoenaed, see what we said in there, and then as appropriate, perhaps try to quash the subpoena. But long story made short, stored in the books and records of the co-op, but nobody gets to look at those unless it's the board as a whole. I hope I've answered that, but if I didn't, ask.
So another question, is it safer not to take executive session minutes unless a motion is made in the executive session?
Well, that is an almost impossible question to answer without knowing the subject that's being discussed.
Okay.
But I let me say, generally speaking, and that can really get you in trouble in my business. But generally speaking, we want to take the minutes, as I've said, as to compensation. We want to take the minutes as to decisions made. But if it is merely discussion, and what is that? Or merely deliberation, or just discussion that we don't want to be had in public, then probably it is safer not to take minutes. I'll walk out on that limb as far as I can and say that is likely the best avenue. And hey, look, if you get in a jam and some members of the board think that ought to the discussion ought to make its way into the minutes and others don't, call me the next day, or because let's get it right, I guess is what I'm saying, or at least try to get it right before we seal those things. Now, this should probably be the next question. We, as everybody on this call knows, we take our minutes, and in the next board meeting, we approve the minutes from the last board meetings, the common practice of approving our minutes, which, by the way, wait, let me talk about that for half a second. Regular board minutes. So sometimes we receive a request in litigation to look at board minutes that have not yet been approved. In other words, the request falls between board meeting number 1 and board meeting number 2, and we haven't approved them in board meeting number 2. Until those minutes are approved in board meeting number 2, they're not minutes yet. And in regular board minutes, okay? And so if that occurs, we want to take a really close look at these sort of interim or purgatory minutes to make sure they're exactly right before we know we're going to be handing them over as soon as they're approved. That same process is not necessary, the way we do it at least, in executive session minutes. So here's what you should do. Because we are not going to be looking at them at the next board meeting, we're going to seal them. Then my recommendation is, and this is once again why I sort of like handwritten minutes of executive session. It's passed around in the board meeting at the end of the executive session before adjournment. Everybody reads them. Everybody either approves them or we make amendments to them to get them right. And that's it. That's the approval process. So you're not going to be seeing, those of you that prepare the agenda for the following board meeting, you're not going to be seeing on the agenda approval of last month's board minutes, approval of last month's executive session minutes. That's not going to be on there. We approved them while we were in executive session. Other questions? These are good questions.
I just answered that one. I'm not seeing any others pop up.
Good. Well, if you think of something while we're on here or later, let me know. Okay. And like I said, that was an actual question I got in. So let me talk about one of the things that I have talked about. If you were at the board chairman's conference a couple of weeks ago or perhaps before, and it is the proliferation of AI generated documents. Which now, according to a CLE that I attended a few weeks back, likely will become the most popular source of litigation in the future. And what do I mean by that? These are documents that somebody at your location decides they want and I hear this term, a quick and dirty or a cheap document. And so they go online and put in whatever prompts they think appropriate, and out comes a lease, or out comes a real estate sales agreement, or out comes whatever it is they're seeking. They utilize that document. Down the road, a dispute arises over that document, and lo and behold, it is determined that no lawyer drafted that document. They drafted it on their own. Now, I'm not saying that you can't draft those documents on your own, but if you're going to do that, you need to be responsible for the consequences of them. And by that, I mean you as a board, if you intend for your cooperative to utilize AI generated documents without anybody taking a look at them, and you're doing that because you want to save a buck here or a buck there, that needs to be a board policy. Because what's going to happen, and it's already happened, I've read the deposition transcript in Christie's meeting in the fall. That document is going to come into play in litigation. And then there's going to be questions posed to the individual that drafted the document, such as, what were your prompts? Tell me all the things that went into your questions to AI to generate the document. That's going to be one set of questions that will be asked. The other set of questions is going to be, okay, Mr. Whoever or Miss Whoever, in the drafting of that, show me where the board approved that the cooperative allows AI generated documents. And without that, there's going to be multiple problems involved. And so everybody is now going to the AI generated documents, and some of you send those to me, so I'm not guessing at this. What AI does is it's just a big accumulator, and it accumulates all the documents of a lease from all over the country or all over the world or wherever it can get some information. And it synthesizes that accumulation of data, and it puts out a document that is only as good as your prompt. And so if you just say, I need a lease to lease a house to Christy, and that's all you say, then your document is going to be the broadest document there possibly could be. It's not going to have only Texas law in it. It's not going to have only law as relates to Travis County. It's not going to be the contemplation of that goes into that document is only going to be as good as your prompt. And so if you're not pretty persnickety and know what it is that you need to be looking out for, then there could be a real issue with that document. This is not just occurring in the general public, but it is occurring in the practice of law. We have already disbarred a lawyer in the state of Texas for, instead of utilizing his training and his experience, instead got on AI and drafted a brief in about a minute and a half. Not to mention the fact that he billed multiple hours for that, but he did it in about a minute and a half and never looked at anything. That was a document that was submitted to the court, and lo and behold, the AI had what is called, you guys that are fluent in AI better than I, it had hallucinations in the document. That is, it had cites to cases that don't even exist. The other side did the work the old-fashioned hard way and brought this up before the judge and said, "Hey, look it, there are these case sites that's been submitted to the court, and we can't find where they exist." And of course, the lawyer that submitted the brief had to go before the court and admit that he had drafted the brief from AI and that he had not read it, he had not checked it, he didn't know what was in there, and that, yes, those cases, after he went to look for them after the fact, that they didn't exist. And so don't send me AI documents, because I don't know what your prompts were to draft that document. It is faster and cheaper just to tell me what it is that you need, as opposed to me taking your document and trying to figure out all the things that it doesn't have. And I use this analogy in when we had our October meeting, and somebody came up to me and said, "I didn't get it until you said that." It is a lot easier to build a house than to remodel a house. Because if you remodel, that is, you send me an AI document and I got to figure out whether it's right or it's wrong. I got to check every little thing about that document, because I don't know, it may be a document from Pennsylvania. It may not be a document not even from the United States that's the basis of the document. Whereas if you tell me, "Hey, I need a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage house," we can roll, because we know what we're doing and we're putting all the stuff in there. And when we get to the finished product, we know what our intent was at the beginning. So it's just a fair warning, but it's a fair warning to the board and not necessarily to the management or personnel, that if you're a board and you want to do that, then you're going to need to authorize that documents. You authorize the personnel to draft documents from AI, and then I guess let the chips fall where they may on that. But beware, those AI documents are going, and they already are. They are the source of coming litigation. There are plaintiffs' attorneys that are actively looking for situations involving somebody having drafted that document. Any other questions about AI? And I'll move on to another subject. And I'm going to have to wrap it up here in about 15 minutes, but I'll move on to other deals, unless you want to talk about AI for a while. Hearing none, let me move on to something that is going to impact all of us. Senate Bill 29. I've talked about this last week or week before with the board chairpersons. So the legislature in the last session passed a bill called Senate Bill 29, which was really, if you go look it up, you're going to think, how does that apply to us? It is a bill that has to do with public companies. It's Governor Abbott's push to get more companies to come to Texas, headquartered in Texas or reincorporated in Texas, in anticipation of the Texas Stock Exchange opening later this year in Dallas. There were some gimmies in the bill that some have not yet paid attention to, but we have. And that there are some provisions in the bill that not only apply to publicly traded companies, but to private companies and indeed to cooperatives. And the two provisions that matter the most to us is one that I'm really high of and proud about and anxious to use, and that is the venue provision. For those of us that are co-ops that have members that may be far-flung, perhaps they live in across the state or indeed across the country, who knows, maybe even outside the country. These necessarily are usually landlords. And we worry about that landlord. If he or she were to sue the cooperative, might they bring the lawsuit in some distant land, California, with very difficult laws with regard to our defending things? California laws are particularly plaintiff friendly. And guys like me and others worry about those things. We get a lawsuit like that where we got to go. Number one, we got to go defend it in another state, and number two, we have to use that state's laws. We have a solution now. We have as a part of Senate Bill 29, there is a venue provision that allows us to fix that venue for members that might sue the cooperative, to fix it in whatever county we want to fix it in. But of course, 99 times out of 100, that would be our home or our headquarter county. And so that could be a tremendous saver of money and worry and expenses in not having to litigate in a foreign state by fixing venue in our own state and, in fact, in our own county. Now, there's a catch. That was given to us as a possibility, but in order to make use of the possibility, you have to do what's called opting in. And opting in is pretty simple. That is, we have to amend our articles of incorporation or charter, as I sometimes call it in talks, as well as our bylaws, to say that we are opting in to Senate Bill 29 and we're accepting the venue statute. I don't say that you need to be a house of fire to get that done tomorrow and amend your bylaws and your charter immediately. But certainly over the course of the next coming period of time, when I'm speaking with some of you about amendments, that's going to be one thing that's brand spanking new that we're going to put into amendments and take advantage of. I'm working on one set of bylaws as we speak, and so that particular co-op will be the first one in the state to have it. But like I say, as time rolls along and we have an opportunity to amend bylaws, then that's something that we're certainly going to incorporate. I don't think there's anybody on this call that has this situation, but if we have a current of a current of members that may be disagreeing with the methods of the co-op, then it might behoove us to go ahead and get those bylaw amendments and charter passed. I don't think that's anybody here, but particularly, for instance, just to call it what it is, if we have a member from living in another state or far away from our home county, we might think about amending the bylaws to make certain that if we get into a fuss, that the fuss is in our backyard. That's venue. That one's the easy one. The other one, the other freebie that Governor Abbott gave us was the business judgment rule. Let me remind you, all of you on this call know this, but remember that we as directors, we get a mulligan. We get the presumption that what we do in the boardroom, uh, even if we make a wrong decision, so long as we're making a decision that is informed, that is, we didn't just haul off and do something and have no basis for it, that it is in the best interest of the co-op, that is, we're not making a decision about us as individual members or some group of farmers, but the corporation, the cooperative as a company. And so long as we do that in compliance with the law, we don't haul off and do something totally illegal. As long as we do those three things, then the business judgment rule has protected us for a century by saying to somebody that wants to sue individual directors or the board as a whole, they have to overcome that. They have to say, hey, Gary was a board member and Gary didn't act in the best interest of the co-op. He acted uninformed and what he did was illegal. That would be the way that they would pierce the business judgment rule. And they got to put on evidence to that effect. But the burden of proof was always on us. We always had to prove that we were doing those things. Well, that is now about to shift. The burden of proof is about to go to the plaintiff to prove that Gary didn't do these three things. That's a big deal if we had a lawsuit, and provides, this is the important sentence you're looking for, provides board members, individual board members, additional liability protection by virtue of having opted into this statute where the burden of proof shifts. But you got to opt in, and the opt in is the same method that I was telling you about on venue. You have to change your articles of incorporation, amend that and your bylaws to say we are opting in to Senate Bill 29's business judgment rule. There's some language that we'll use. I'm going to draft it, I guess, for the first time on these. But there's some language that we'll use that will give you, the board, that protection. But of course, in order to do that, either of these, we have to take that to the membership. The board can't vote on that on its own. It's an amendment, just like any other amendment on the Articles of Incorporation. It's got to pass by at least 2/3 of those present and voting. On the bylaws, it's got to pass by at least a simple majority of those present and voting. And so what could happen? I guess it is possible that you could have a member or members that think, well, that seems to provide sort of extra or too much protection to board members. To which I would say to that person, well, if you were on the board, you would want the same protection, because these are board members that if they're getting any compensation, it's minimal. And when they get on the board, they expect assurances that their individual operations are not going to be subject to liability. We do that by lots of ways, D&O and E&O coverage, other methods by which we protect board members and what have you. But this is just one more bullet that we would have in the protection of directors. And maybe this is a common problem that we have in the co-op community all over. It's awfully hard to get somebody to run for the board. And from time to time, some of those folks that we approach about running for the board say, nah, I don't want to do it because it's potential liability. I don't want to place my operation at risk because of that. And if we opt in to this, then that's just one more assurance or reassurance that we give them that being on the board is not the risky thing that they may think it is. So Senate Bill 29, you can look it up and read all about it, as they say. You're going to read primarily about all it's supposed to do to help with all the publicly traded companies. But the governor did give us a bone or two in these couple of provisions that I think are going to be helpful to the cooperatives. And as I've said, we'll pass those kind of probably catch as catch can, kind of as you call me and want to make some bylaw amendments, we'll make those. Questions about Senate Bill 29. Questions about anything? Because I'm at the end of my ability to talk much longer. I got to hang up in about 3 minutes. But any questions, burning questions that you have, and they sure don't have to be about what I've talked about this morning. I hope some of those things I've mentioned were a little bit helpful for you. Christy, anything you see?
No, I don't see anything on the chat.
It's a quiet audience this morning, huh? And it's about lunchtime.
Yes, I think that's always the cue, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, otherwise, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. If a question pops in your brain later today or a month down the road, let me know and I'll do my best to try to answer it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gary, for joining us. We always
You-
appreciate all your help keeping us out of trouble.
You bet. Thanks, Christy. Bye.
Thank you. All right. Well, that concludes our program this morning. Gary was our last speaker. We hope you all enjoyed this and got a lot out of it. It is going to be recorded. As soon as we get it up on our YouTube channel, I will share that link with everybody. And of course, just stay in touch. And if there's anything TACC can do for you, please let us know. Thank you all for joining us this morning.